Great. Thank you, Aaron. Welcome back, everyone. We want to finish strong, and we've invited two speakers that are really going to address common issues that we see with almonds. And Luke Milliron is a crop advisor in the northern part of the state, and he'll be talking about irrigation for almonds, and then Franz Niederholzer will be talking about almond nutrition. So I think we'll get a good dose of real practical information. That's what they both wanted to emphasize today. So Luke will be our first speaker. Luke Milliron is a orchards advisor with UC Cooperative Extension for the northern Sacramento Valley. Luke did his undergraduate work at Chico State and then his graduate work in agronomy and horticulture at UC Davis. He's based in Butte County, but covers orchard crops in Glen County and Tehama counties as well, working particularly with almonds, walnuts, and prunes. And it would be interesting to talk to Luke later because he worked for a analytical lab earlier in his career and get his take on some of what we heard from Andre earlier. But there's a lot of new technology and a lot of new approaches that are being applied to irrigation now, and I'm looking forward to hearing Luke talk about some practical advances in how we irrigate almonds. So we'll turn the time over to you, Luke, and look forward to your presentation.
Excellent, Rob. Thank you for that introduction. It's a real honor to be asked to speak. So very excited for that. I will be covering some practical advances in almond irrigation sustainability here. Anytime you're wanting to seek more information about orchard practices from Cooperative Extension, you can contact your local orchard farm advisor at the Cooperative Extension office in your county. We also have SacValleyOrchards.com and SJVTNV.com as regional websites for the Sac and San Joaquin Valleys respectively, where you can find articles, learn about upcoming events. And then finally, Phoebe Gordon, a farm advisor in Madera and Merced counties, and I started Growing the Valley podcast, which you should all listen to. And on that podcast this past year, we had a 10-part irrigation series, starting with the basics and then going into the different types of irrigation management, whether it's soil, plant-based, or ET. So that is available, and you can also get Cure CEU credits by listening to those and answering some questions. So the Almond Board often touts, and I'm sure you've heard it, that they have had practices with almond growers that these production practices and new technology have been able to reduce the amount of water it takes to grow a pound of almonds by 33% in the past 20 years. And of course, they have this goal of the 2025 goals. Water is one of those, and specifically it's to reduce the amount of water to grow a pound of almonds by a further 20%. So here we're going to launch into our first poll, Aaron. Yeah, I think that it's often the same as asking whether any tool is a good tool or not a good tool. It all depends on how it is used. So it seems that most folks agree that it depends. It depends on the situation, whether it's sustainable or not. Alrighty, moving along here. We also want to acknowledge that, yes, we're looking for advances, we're looking to become more efficient, but we're also in this era of, at least in the short term, low prices for all of our crops. And so how can folks have a lean operation where they're still being efficient and saving on water and energy, managing for diseases, still having good tree health and increasing yields? And when it comes to new technology, we as consultants and folks in education have to ask whether this new technology, what is the return on investment for growers? When times are tough, is this a proven technology with a reliable ROI, or is it more experimental? And certainly have to be conscious of what is proven to work. So an example of this would be the pre-establishment time in an orchard. And that is a time where hopefully folks are starting by consulting soil maps that you can find online. Maybe they're even going in and mapping the ground with sensors like Veris or EM38. And then they're going in and doing ground truthing of, say, there's a sandy portion of the field and a clay portion of the field, and they're going to dig some backhoe pits, take soil samples, send those to a lab, and then take practices to improve the soil beforehand, tillage or chemicals, whatever's needed to get started. And that is where the question of zone irrigation would be installed if there's enough variability on the site to warrant it. And that is an area I am concerned would potentially fall off the radar in a time of lean prices. We know that when prices get lean, a lot of orchards get removed, and what practices are being taken if almonds are going following almonds. So here we have what the Soil Web survey looks like, the UC Davis product that you can use, and you can even get on your Google Earth. And in the lower portion of the field, they even did Veris soil mapping, and then they could then use this soil mapping and the ground truthing of backhoe pits and soil samples to say, we're going to break this up into multiple zones where we know that we'll never be able to irrigate efficiently this clay portion of the field and the sandy portion of the field. Those need to be on different irrigation sets. And yes, this is more money up front, but here we're making a 20-25 year investment. So those efficiencies in water and nutrients and in tree size, tree health over that time, something like soil mapping and potentially doing zone irrigation is something that could really pay for itself in the long term. And we don't want to lose sight of the long term when times get tough. The main thing I'll be looking at the lens of almond improvement through is the Almond Irrigation Improvement Continuum from the Almond Board. And they created this with a number of farm advisors. I may sound like I work for the Almond Board or something. I do not, but I feel like the Almond Board does one of the best jobs of the different crop boards in having a framework to view irrigation education and improvement through. So at the start of this continuum, let's just think about applied water. And you can view that in a very fundamental 1.0 level, an intermediate level, and then the 3.0 advanced level. So at a fundamental level, you may only be looking at what's the irrigation specs. You have a new system and your irrigation installer says this is how much the application rate is. You may take some measurements, but the second level would be to have meters on your system and know how much is going out. And then the third level would be either comparing the specs of your system or what it's actually metered to apply and bringing that back to how much water is being lost with evapotranspiration. And the Almond Board has this California Almond Sustainability Program, CASP, deal where they have surveyed growers over the years, and in the most recent statewide results, they found that 80% have some understanding at least of what the application rate is. Nearly half have water meters, and almost 3/4 are comparing either a water meter or your system application rate to evapotranspiration, which is encouraging and is increased from earlier survey results, and also shows that there's still some room where we could get some improvement in the industry too. So for more information on applied water and determining that, you can go to sackvalleyorchards.com, go to the ET Reports tab, and we have a number of calculators that Alan Fulton and others developed. So specifically, water application rate for drip and micro sprinklers, we select that. We have 1 gallon per hour emitters, 4 emitters per tree, and 130 trees per acre, which is going to tell us our applied water in inches per hour, which we can then take the ET reports that we can sign up for on sackvalleyorchards.com or another extension service and get those weekly ET reports, and we can then calculate a runtime. So we have these calculators to make the job a little bit easier. When looking at water requirements, a grower could have a table out of a production manual or from the internet that shows what is the historical, the standard ET rates in my region, and then consult that every couple weeks or every month and adjust their irrigation practices based on it. At an intermediate level, they could make adjustments a little bit more frequently and say, okay, we're going into some hot weather, so we're going to adjust the rate upwards. We're going to run our irrigation a little bit longer, or you make an adjustment for a cover crop. At the most advanced rate, you're getting those ET reports from Extension. You're adjusting on a weekly basis. Maybe you're even adjusting for young tree canopies. And the use in the CAST data from an earlier set of data from 09 to 13 compared to the most recent set increased from about half to over 3/4 of growers reporting that they're using some type of ET use. So it's encouraging to see that growth, and shows that we could still get some mileage with ET education. And part of that ET education happened this summer with Alan Fulton having a whole webinar series. And one of the things he showed was that question of young orchard ET that you should be able to handle at the most advanced level. And here, yes, these are prune trees on the left and not almond trees, but the example still works. 18 of these 44 boxes that you see are shaded. So another way of viewing that is if you just look down the row, about 40% of the ground is covered in shade and 60% the sun is hitting it here at midday. So you'd go to this table, you'd see that equates to about 0.67 of a mature orchard. So when you get Alan's ET report on Friday and you see that 2 inches was lost in almond orchard that week in your area, you can multiply that by 0.67 to get an estimate for your orchard. So here's his title of talks in that webinar series. And again, this is a source where you could potentially get your CURES credits, or your growers could, by going to the CURES website. Then moving on to system performance, which we heard Brian give that excellent talk of earlier, just how important DU is. At the most fundamental level, you're just looking at pressure and your flow rate every 3 years. At intermediate level, you're at least looking at DU, and then in the most advanced level, you're doing it more frequently. And saw some modest increase in the most recent survey results, with up to 88% of folks saying that they're doing some frequency of system performance evaluation. An example from Alan Fulton on why DU is so critical. Here with a 70% DU, you're applying almost twice as much water in one part of the field than you are in another. Affects the power bill. It affects your fertilizer efficiency, and it really impacts potentially uniformity and tree loss. And as Brian so appropriately drove home, that low DU, it overshadows everything. It makes all these other technologies and efficiency gains kind of mute if you don't first tackle the system. So as Brian showed, you have the Northwest Kern Resource Conservation District, and there's also the Tehama County Resource Conservation District that covers a number of counties in the Sac Valley that you could potentially get a free evaluation of your system. But if you're not covered by one of those conservation districts, the Almond board has a YouTube video on how to do your own evaluation. Moving on to soil moisture. At the most fundamental level, you are taking a soil probe or an auger and you're going out to the field and augering down to 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 feet, and taking a clod of soil in your hand and ribboning it and judging by feel and appearance what the relative water content is. And then at an intermediate level, you have maybe manually operated sensors, something like a neutron probe service that you've signed up for, and then you are adjusting your runtime based on those readings. At most advanced level, you have automated sensors, you're getting data on a weekly basis, and you're adjusting your runtime based on that. So about 60% of folks are using some kind of soil moisture sensor technology, which is exciting. I think that's really great technology, especially for adjusting your runtime. How deep is water going in your system? Trying to make sure that you're addressing that 2 to 3 feet, and but maybe not chasing the 4 to 5 feet if that starts drying out as the season progresses. So the soil moisture graphs, I am concerned, could be misused based on how they're interpreted. But the technique, the ancient technique of looking at soil and judging how much moisture is in it is really important. Something I learned from Daniel Casabagill at Della Valley Laboratory when I was a technician there. Something I believe that all consultants and farmers should have some understanding of. And the USDA has a good guide that you can Google where you look at wet versus dry, and your interpretation criteria change based on soil texture. Then, of course, you have all the sensor technology. Generally, it's based on tension, something like gypsum blocks, or more volumetric readings like capacitance probes or neutron probe readings. Then we turn to my favorite subject, because I work with Ken Shackle and was his student at UC Davis. Plant water status is my favorite. So at the most fundamental level, you're at least looking at the tree and you're like, whoa, those trees are water stressed. I think I need to irrigate. We can all see that around harvest time, how stressed trees can get. But the issue there is that things can progress further than you'd like before irrigation. So that's why we have the pressure chamber to give us actual numerical bars of tension that we can judge at least periodically to adjust our irrigation. And then at the most advanced level, we're using the pressure chamber on more of a weekly basis, and we're comparing those readings to the fully watered baseline. So we're not just saying, well, the chamber says 10 bars, we're saying the chamber says 2 bars below the 8-bar fully watered baseline for today. So maybe I can hold off on irrigating for a while. I'll wait for it to be 3 or 4 bars below the fully watered baseline. It's whole split timing. So it can be used at whole split for a moderate deficit, or it can be used to start the irrigation season. It can be used like times like now in determining when you can stop the irrigation season. So about a third, almost a third of growers are using the pressure chamber to some extent, where almost all growers are at least looking at the tree and making some determinations of how the tree is looking in terms of its water status. But the pressure chamber has huge implications for growth yield and tree health. And folks in the Sac Valley who use the pressure chamber across a lot of acreage say that they can get it down to $10 to $20 per acre to run annually. Bruce Lampinen, our almond walnut specialist at UC Davis, did some work on orchard establishment from the first leaf to the 8th leaf, showing that if you kept bars roughly at 16 bars versus if you kept them at 12 bars across the season or 8 bars across the season, had tremendous impacts on growth and yield. So those 16 bar trees, pretty darn stressed, those weren't even capturing half the light in the orchard at 8th leaf, whereas your 8 bar trees, they were already capturing the 80% that we're trying to get to, the goal. So over 8 years and with 4 bars of stress difference here, that is over $400,000 of potential crop value lost during those early years. But lest you get the idea that more water is always the answer, it is not. When farm advisors go out, we almost never see underwater trees, but we often see overwater trees. One of the examples of that being that you can have hole rot around the hole split timing, and late in the season you can also see lower limb dieback, which is still somewhat of a mystery, but we attribute most to over-irrigation early in the season. So some very serious potential health consequences for the orchard. And as Bruce also notes, with over-irrigation, those small trees will suffer. They don't have the capacity to use the water and get rid of it. And if you under-irrigated just slightly, the larger trees will grow more slowly and the orchard will become more uniform over time. Because I know I will be asked, a lot of folks don't like going out into the field in the heat of a Madera or a Butte County July and taking your pressure chamber readings. So there are some automated plant-based readings that are coming online. I had some experience this season with FloraPulse. It does have good agreement with the pressure chamber, but like with this or with a soil moisture sensor site, it really depends on location or the tree you've chosen. So I happened to choose one of the wettest trees in the orchard for my sensors, so it really matters of how representative your tree is, and I'm not sure how that cost per acreage works out versus the pressure chamber. But newer technologies are coming online. The pressure chamber remains a very cost-effective direct way. So, Aaron, I think we're ready for our second poll. Well, you guys are far too kind, and I know that the folks, the 3% that said no, that's because they're already so die-hard plant-based folks. So, no, thanks a lot. Moving on, the desire from the Almond board and from every irrigation consultant is that folks will take all these disparate technologies and these different passive improvement and start bringing them together and become better irrigators. So they may adjust their weekly irrigation each and every week, adjusting it based on real-time ETC. They have hopefully both automated soil moisture sensors, so you see how deep water is getting, but you also have pressure chamber data, and you're comparing that to baseline to time when to irrigate. So bringing it all together is always going to be really important. So moving towards the summary here, the 2025 goal from the almond industry is to increase the water use efficiency by 20%. Amidst tight margins, we really do not want to forget the long term here. We don't want, with that example of potential zone irrigation, we want to make sure that we're investing in that 20, 30-year lifespan of the orchard and being most efficient with every irrigation, every input that goes out. We have all of these different ways that we could be improving from a fundamental all the way to an advanced level, whether it's the applied water, the water requirement, and the soil moisture, plant-based irrigation. And finally, I hope that I have convinced you that yes, the new technology coming online absolutely does have a role, but the continuation of just improving on the fundamentals that I have shared, those could really get us to that 20% efficiency improvement if we just adhere to the fundamentals and integrate them. So we are ready for that third and final poll question. Yeah, we have a very optimistic group, so it's good to see, and they would definitely agree with the Almond board that it's a combination of the new technology and fundamentals that are key. And just to wrap, a big thank you to California Almonds and to FREP for funding such great research, to the California Almond Sustainability Program for the data, and to Aaron for the fabulous country music. I love 90s country music. So, alrighty, thank you folks.